Good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to another edition of Western Kentucky University's Global Learning Forum. Today we have a very special event. We're going to be speaking with some colleagues from two different countries in Africa, from Kenya and from South Africa, about political violence and especially, what do the events of January 6th look like from a non-American perspective. And so I'm delighted that we'll be having some guests joining us today to share some thoughts and some comments about that. I want to start out just by saying that, these video presentations are a part of Western Kentucky University as a university that represents an opportunity for people to research, to explore, and to learn about different things around the world, academic and non-academic, and events that impact us and our daily lives. These do not represent any specific viewpoint of Western Kentucky University, but they do represent an opportunity for a university to ask the big hard questions and to discuss and to be a forum for those conversations. And we're proud to do that here at Western. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Belinder Odek from Bridge Africa. Belinder's in Nairobi. Hi, Belinder. Good evening.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very happy to be here. I look forward to a great conversation.
Good. We're delighted and honored to have you here.
Thank you.
So, what time is it in Nairobi?
Well, it is 4 minutes past 8 p.m. in Nairobi.
Wow, it's just a little afternoon here in Bowling Green.
Awesome.
So I'm going to ask you, and then we'll go and we'll meet Martin. But can you tell us a little bit about Bridge Africa?
Oh, okay. So we are a tri-continental organization. So which means we are in 3 different continents. We are in the US, we are in Europe, and we are also in Africa. And we are focused on students and creating the next generation of empathetic, engaged, and informed citizens. So we have certain principles.
So Belinder, you're breaking up. So here's what I'd like to do. Belinder has her camera turned off so that it because of the bandwidth it absorbs. And so so what I will do, sorry, Belinder, I will introduce Martin, and then we'll come back to you, Belinder. So Belinder is the president of Bridge Africa, and I'd like to introduce our colleague Martin van Staden, and I hope I've said that right, Martin, who's in Pretoria, South Africa. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you for having me, John. It's great to be here.
Great. Martin, can you tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, what time is it in South Africa?
It's a little past 7 in the evening.
Okay. So we're 8 o'clock, a little after 8 in Kenya, and we're a little after 7 in South Africa, and we're at noon here in Bowling Green. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do with Bridge Africa and what got you engaged with Bridge Africa.
All right. Yeah. So I've only been with Bridge Africa for I think about over a year now. I was invited by my good friend Belinder. We've known each other for quite a while. Met across the continent several times. But I am by training a jurist. I can't say that I'm a lawyer because I don't practice law, but I do think about the law and I do write about the law, particularly constitutional law, quite often in South Africa, and I'm very active commenter in the media and so forth on matters of constitutional law and legal policy generally. So the rule of law is, for instance, a value system of legal principles, and I would classify that as legal policy, the types of things that legislators have to take into account when they legislate. So I work very much with institutions, legal institutions in particular, and I believe that is the reason why Belinder offered me the post of chief advisor for legal policy on Bridge Africa's board of advisors. So I have done some speaking engagements with Bridge Africa. The most recent one was, I believe it was in November of last year when we were discussing the coup in Mali and the implications of the rule of law for coups in general. Unfortunately, details were sketchy, so we couldn't really get into the meat and potatoes of the coup itself. But we could discuss in quite some detail some of the I guess, institutional issues that unfortunately face or are present in large swathes of Africa. And that is what I keep myself busy with for Bridge Africa and in my daily employment. So Belinda and I met through an organization that I believe a lot of your audience might be familiar with, and that is Students for Liberty. It's a Washington D.C. based student libertarian organization. I know that term is quite contentious, and I'm happy to engage with the contentiousness of it. But Students for Liberty was, I believe, the one of the first major American libertarian organizations that reached out and branched out into Africa and started developing a generation of African leaders for liberty. Um, and I was brought into it about a year after it started by Olamayoa Okediran, and that's how I met Belinder a while thereafter in Students for Liberty. And it's quite interesting that I know libertarianism is often quite racialized in the United States, but it's interesting that for I guess most of my tenure in Students for Liberty between 2014 and I believe 2017, I was the only white person in African Students for Liberty until another few South Africans joined up. So we are really an African movement. And I feel quite proud to say that there is such a thing as a libertarian movement in Africa, and I mean this links up quite well with what Bridge Africa seeks to do, and that is to really be quite a bridge, in fact, between people of various ideological persuasions. I know in the States and in Europe, Bridge there has done good work hosting discussions between people who are considered left and people who are considered right wing and third way and so forth. And it's very interesting that now in Africa we too are enabled to have these conversations because for a very long time Africa has really had uh, I guess, an underdeveloped political discourse. It's unfortunately in vast swathes of Africa, the political discourse really comes down to strongman politics, simply factional politics, rather than a politics of ideas. And it's a very different type of polarization, I would say, that from what is experienced in the United States. I think in the United States, you could say that there's a polarization of ideas. We are not so lucky in large parts of Africa. There definitely are exceptions. But again, this comes back to this point about institutions and my my area of expertise, if you can say that, is the rule of law. I wrote a book on that. And that is one of the functions that this institution has. It is to ensure that people with widely different beliefs can live and work together harmoniously. And that is something that we in Bridge and elsewhere are definitely trying to push for in Africa.
Yeah, Martin, that's fascinating, and I hope that when Belinder's network connection returns, that she'll be able to join us. But we'll continue the conversation. One of the key elements, and I think one of the things that was most surprising to me as an American, and just a little bit about my background, I've been engaged with Africa really since the early 1980s. Quite frankly, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Nebraska, I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement, which was the separation of races in South Africa, and boycotting U.S. companies that were investing in South Africa to help to influence, if not a change in the laws, a change in the regime, so that there could be a change in the law. So, for me personally, it's fascinating, to be having some of these conversations 40 years later, with a massive transition that has occurred in South Africa, again, in the pursuit of liberty for all citizens, for all people who live in the country. And the challenges that we're looking at here, the US and South Africa have been on this kind of parallel thing really since their founding. And in terms of what is, forming governments and race relations, power, of course, and what is freedom, what is property, what is ownership, and so the changes in both countries have been dramatic, but even more so, I think, in South Africa. And I recall, very fondly in 1994 when I was living in London, walking down to Trafalgar Square to participate in a massive celebration in front of South Africa House, for the transition to majority rule in South Africa. And I know it's been a rocky road, along the way. It's not been easy. And I think one of the most critical aspects, and this is what was so shocking, getting back to the United States in the 60s, is the peaceful transition of power in a democracy from one ruling group to the next. And again, I think that's kind of one of the things that we'll talk about. Belinda, welcome back.
Thank you.
If and I understand. I mean, we're dealing on a lot of different continents with a lot of different, well, two different continents, with a lot of different connectivity issues and time, and everybody doing their homework and sucking up the bandwidth or whatever. But can you just, Martin talked a bit about his role within Bridge Africa. Can you tell us, Belinda, a little bit about Bridge Africa, how you got involved, and what it is and what you do there?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I will keep my camera off for a little bit so that my audio can be able to serve the purpose for now. So I was saying that Bridge Africa is a continental organization. That means that we are in 3 different continents. We are in Bridge USA, we are in the USA, we are in Europe, and now we are in Africa. And what we do is that we are focused on students and creating the next generation of empathetic, engaged, and informed citizens. And we do appreciate that in order for us to solve some of the societal problems that we face today, we have to be able to engage in a conversation with each other. And what we have done as Bridge is we have developed certain things that we encourage individuals to consider before joining conversations. One is the mindset that you bring into a conversation. And then the other one is how you have the actual conversation. It goes a long way into being able to find long-term solutions to some of the political, social, and economic problems that we face as a people today. So when you talk about the mindset that you bring to the table. We have a bridge mindset, which we encourage our students to have. And this is basically, you have to appreciate that you can't be right about everything. And the other one is you must be willing to learn, because if you're not willing to learn, you're going to focus on your arguments rather than listening to the different viewpoints that are being expressed by the different participants who are involved in that conversation. And then how you actually have the conversation. For how you have the conversation, we have developed certain norms that govern our discussion platforms, one of which is you do not interrupt somebody when they're speaking. You let them speak through their points. And the other one is you listen to listen, as opposed to just listening to respond to what someone else is saying. The third one is you are supposed to critique the perspective and not the person who is speaking. So you're supposed to focus on what somebody is saying, the topic that is being discussed, and not the person saying it. Because we have the tendency to say that, for example, if Martin is speaking and is allied to the ANC in South Africa, then he's speaking for the ANC. So you also have to recognize that you have to treat people as individuals. So you do not expect somebody to speak on behalf of a group that they are involved with. So how we create impact on the college campuses in US, Europe, and Africa is by promoting moderated student-led discussions to spread political awareness and empathy. And also we do once in a while invite keynote speakers to challenge preconceived notions on political issues and current events. And thirdly and lastly is we partner with campus administrations and organizations to organize large events at campuses. Now, somebody might want to know like how we are able to achieve this. We have a certain very important group of people that we work with, one of which is the chapter founder. The chapter founder is the student leader who is involved with Bridge Africa at the university level, and their role is to run the chapter and empower members to kickstart these important discussions that we're talking about. And then you have the researcher, because we emphasize on quality over quantity. So we have to make sure that the discussions are well researched and the participants are well informed about the topic that they're going to discuss. So the researcher, what he does is that they shape the public debate with quality content. And then we also work with the chapter development consultants, whose role is to advise chapters on growth strategies through analysis. And then lastly, and very important, is we have the participants, who are the students. It could be students, it could be faculties, it could be anybody from outside, whose role is to discuss, learn, empathize, and bridge. Now, the other thing I would like to say about Bridge Africa is some of the things that we are working on, or some of the issues that we're working to address, are elements that lead to eventually lead to the decline of democracy. And we're talking about political apathy. We see a lot of that in Africa, in the US, and everywhere else in Africa, in the world. So political apathy is one of them. Then we have polarization of the intellect, and then we have reinforcement of bipartisan labels. Now, when you have these things, you cannot focus on quality discussions. What it does is that it forms political extremism, and therefore you will not focus on what somebody is saying, but rather focus on the kind of political parties that they are allied to. So we have a signature, we have several types of events that we organize, but one of our signature events is political speed dating. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So just quickly take you through some of the type of events that we organize at the campus level. So we have political speed dating, we have faculty-led discussions, we have the melting pot, and a few others. But I'll just give you an example of political speed dating to highlight the quality of work that we do with Bridge Africa. So political speed dating is basically having discussion attendees debate those they disagree with. Why do we do this? We do this because if you look at some of the issues that lead to political polarization, it has to do with intolerance to dissent, not wanting to listen to what somebody is saying because they belong to a different group as yourself. And then we also have the faculty-led discussion, which is where we invite a professor to lead a discussion on a topic that students really wouldn't have the knowledge to have a productive conversation about. An example of that would be school choice and comparative education systems in the world. And then after that, you just open the floor to students for comments and questions. And I just want to quickly comment before I finish is that what we do at Bridge is important because it helps to ensure that our discussions are productive, empathetic, and constructive. And a good example of that is what the Bridge USA is doing with A Starting Point, Free Intelligent Conversation, and Newsweek. They were just recently discussing, talking about school safety and gun control. You have to appreciate the complexity of such matters. So if we are able to engage young people into such discussions and ensure that they have quality engagement, then I think that is what we need to be able to reshape the political landscape of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you. That is fascinating, and it's remarkable work that you all do with Bridge Africa. And especially in this, as you mentioned, in this age of internet, where communication is so fast and it can be generated to get out to so many people so quickly that misinformation can be, distributed very quickly, but also intentionally used to shape a conversation and a dialogue and polarize people in one direction or another. And the results of that can be really quite frightening. And I think that's one of the things that we saw on the 6th of January, where people were riled up and were very, there was a lot of misinformation about the big lie of, who actually won the election and election fraud and so forth. And, the impact that kind of misinformation had on people and their decisions. Martin, do you want to, can you talk a little bit about just from your perspective, when you saw, I guess it would have been on January 7th, but when you saw the storming of the U.S. Capitol, first of all, as someone who has studied the law and constitutions and so forth, and I believe that the United States has the oldest, continuous constitution in the world. What had you thought about American democracy, let's say before January 6th? And how did that get reshaped or changed or informed as a result of January 6th?
Yeah, so I guess I'm not as pessimistic as many people are about January 6th. I think that American institutions are incredibly strong, and to me and to, I believe, many other Africans, they are something that we aspire our own institutions in our own countries to become like one day, and it has nothing to do necessarily with your written constitution. It's actually a constitution that gives a fair amount of power to, for instance, to the president and so on, and that in Africa is a big no-no. There's something that you want to avoid at all costs. But because America really has a remarkable culture of constitutionalism, in that every American man, woman, and child, to some extent, believes in the value of of democracy, of republicanism, not to be confused with the party, but also of liberty and of constrained government. And I'm not necessarily just saying this as a libertarian, but I believe people from all sides of the political aisle do have some interest in having a government that does not ride roughshod over their interests and them when their opponents are in power. And I believe it's quite awe-inspiring the extent to which American institutions show resilience. Now, of course, the storming of the Capitol was, I guess, call it a hiccup to an African like myself. It was just another Wednesday, to be quite frank. To Americans, this was the biggest media event, I guess, in the last couple of years, and it's something that I believe Americans will be talking about for many more years. And I think that's also awe-inspiring, because this one event, where maybe a tiny little crack came about in a pillar of American constitutionalism, it's taken so seriously, and rightly so, that even now there are still trials ongoing, there are still investigations ongoing. The media is going to keep talking about it. But in Africa, things like this, I don't want to create the impression that all of Africa is just one monolithic thing where these things happen. There are real gems on this continent of stability and of developing prosperity, but unfortunately, amongst a very large number of countries, things like this do not happen that rarely. For instance, last year, from January to December, around 1,300 Congolese were killed in ethnic violence. Various elections took place last year in 2020, where the elections were simply boycotted, where the incumbent is now serving their fifth term after something like 30 years in power. Um, Extreme violence in and around every single election, leading to dozens of deaths, with not even remotely the same kind of media coverage, even remotely the same kind of institutional focus from the judiciary, from the media, from the police. The police and the media and the judiciary are often just part of the debacle, which is an incredibly sad thing to see. And what's inspiring about the American example was, and I think this is sometimes lost on a lot of people, it was that after the election and after Donald Trump lost the election, um, a lot of his supporters, and I know he has a lot of libertarian supporters. I definitely do not count myself among them, but people thought that. Great. President Trump appointed all these judges, all these federal judges across the country, and he's going to challenge these election results, and they're going to reject the results, and he's going to get his 4 more years. And case after case before so called Trump judges, they were dismissed, they were thrown out. Judges from all across the political spectrum said, "Guy, what are you doing? These are not solid legal arguments. This is nonsense. Take your defeat. Take it like a man." And that was remarkable to me. I know the American media likes referring to judges appointed by Republicans as Republican judges and judges appointed by Democrats as Democratic judges, but what I saw in that process, and it even reached the Supreme Court, where there's a so-called Republican majority, where the court simply refused to hear an appeal by the Trump campaign, simply saying that there's no real standing, and it was a remarkable display of institutional independence from the courts, and it just goes to show the strength of the institutions, even though the president, the executive head of the government, the so-called most powerful man in the world, wanted his way. He wanted the exact opposite of what the courts, which are regarded as the weakest branch of government, said. And lo and behold, he was still there was still a peaceful transition. I know there were unfortunate deaths at the storming of the Capitol, but on the whole, and as compared to Africa, it was a remarkably peaceful transition. I know there's still some talks about Mr. Trump returning in 4 years. God help us, but we saw that American institutions fought off the what seemed like what was going to happen was a coup. I know there was some planning of people storming into Washington D.C. and taking it over, and a whole bunch of nonsense that never came to be. Thank the Lord. And here we still have a functioning American democracy, and we will still see a functioning American democracy for many years to come. And Africans will continue to aspire to having not the American copy pasted American blueprint on Africa, but to develop that culture, that respect for institutions, that idea that just because you as a president have now served out your 2 terms does not mean you get to have the constitution amended to give yourself 2 more terms, which is very common in Africa and is now also common in Russia, which shows that it's not an ethnic or a continental thing, but really a mentality thing. And we in Africa, I think, really we need more of what you have as a culture of constitutionalism, an almost innate respect for the rule of law. And I would just say that Americans really shouldn't be too be concerned. That's what makes what characterizes your culture of constitutionalism. Be concerned about political polarization flaring up into violence. Definitely be concerned, but don't join the chorus of individuals and commentators saying this is the end of American democracy and this is simply now over. No, you have a remarkably resilient system of government, and it will continue to be resilient, in my humble opinion. And yeah, that's basically what I thought when I saw the storming of the Capitol. I wasn't too concerned. I was just glad that Americans indeed are concerned.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Martin. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your vote of confidence in our democracy, which I share. Belinder, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit from your well, first of all, as I recall from an earlier conversation, you became involved with Bridge Africa in part because of some experiences that you had when you were a child. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Thank you, John. So the reason why I got involved with Bridge USA, I should say, and eventually formed Bridge Africa is because of an experience that I had with my family in 2007. So in 2007, if you can recall, Kenya had a very bloody post-election violence. And I come from a family that consists of people from different ethnic groups. So my dad had these children from other tribes other than where I come from. So in 2007, what happened was that when we disagreed with the election results, people started fighting. It turned bloody. And then what we do in Kenya, because our elections are highly ethnocentric, politics rather is highly ethnocentric. And then that means that if you find yourself at the wrong place at that time, then you are risking getting yourself killed and you are risking getting your family harmed. So what was happening is that we had a section of people, rowdy youths, threatening to come and burn our home because we had people from the Kikuyu tribe, from the Kamba tribe, and other tribes. And I am from the Luo community. So that really made
like
me
President
sad
Obama,
because
correct?
I did not. Yes. So I did not believe that politics is supposed to push us to our limits. I didn't believe that politics is supposed to make me think that all of a sudden, because Martin is Kikuyu and I am Luo, he's not supposed to live near me. He's not supposed to be my friend. We can't do anything together. But that is exactly what was happening at the time in Kenya. So I vowed myself that eventually I have to start an initiative where we will be teaching people how to have civil, empathetic, and constructive political conversations with each other that is not centered on ethnicity, but rather centered on the issues that affect all of us, no matter where we come from and no matter the political parties that we are affiliated to.
That is fascinating. And Belinder, I mean, I'm so sorry to hear about the fear that you and your family must have felt, and the violence that I'm sure that you probably saw at that time. Sorry, I recall seeing that in 2007, that election, and it was very disturbing to me as someone who spent a fair amount of time in Kenya and really respects the country for what it's done. And but channeling that energy into something very productive and especially the things that you had talked about earlier, a format for communication, the importance of empathy, and the importance of learning and respect and listening, and not just listening to get to defeat someone else, but really listening to someone's perspective so that you can understand and both of you can move forward. I really commend you, for the fine work that you and your colleagues are doing with Bridge Africa.
Thank you.
So tell me, from the perspective we heard from Martin as a South African, and as someone who has studied law and is very interested in constitutions, Belinda, as someone who studies and who is interested in interpersonal interactions and in forming positive groups to resolve and address and understand different issues, how did you see the United States before the 6th of January, and how are you seeing it evolve after the 6th of January? How did you respond?
To be honest, I think that the US has had one of the longest serving democracies in the world. And from my perspective, the American spirit has been forged through crisis and adversity, where you overcome in search of common purpose and resolve. So what happened on January 6th is really it was interesting, and also it was a bit of a shock, because really nobody thought that something like that can happen in the American soil. Like so before that, I thought America is a very strong democracy and nothing like that can happen. But then again, I appreciate the fact that we have political extremists being formed every day because of the increasing levels of political polarization. And but I didn't know that one day I would wake up to Potters, saying that we are going to walk through Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania. We are going to show them our pride and take back our country. And then boom, we have people entering the Capitol and disrupting a vote count of towards a legitimately elected government. Nobody saw that coming in the US at all. And I thought that was a wake-up call to the entire world with regards to where democracy is. And but I think that there are a few things that the US can do in order to address that and get back to its former glory of a stable political democracy. One of which is political parties must recognize that their parties don't have answers to all the problems. And that one of the most important things is that they need to engage the other side of the political divide to come up with long-term solutions to some of the issues that you face. And the other thing is we need to find out, like, what happened, like what are the events that led up to what happened at the Capitol on January 6th? What is happening in the US? What is the state of mental health, for example? So everybody has a role to play. Institutions like the Western Kentucky University should make it easy for students to access mental health counseling. Political leaders must relearn their purpose, and you have to support organizations to elevate youth voices and bring a culture of empathy in politics. So that is what I think.
Thank you. That's awesome. And it's, as an American, it's so wonderful hearing, Belinder, from you, and from you as well, Martin, just about your perceptions of the United States, from outside, and what we have. I think too often, and I can't speak for all Americans, but for myself, I think too often we do take for granted what we have here, especially like the democracy and the respect that we have for one another as a culture. We have a lot of polarization. We are wrestling with a lot of very, very challenging issues. And we've done some really remarkable things. And we talk a lot about sort of hard skills and soft skills within a university and in education and preparing people. So hard skills are things like the hard sciences, mathematics, physics, chemistry, the, engineering and technology, those are the sort of hard skills. And then there's the sense that soft skills of, communication with people, solving problems, interacting with people are somehow a lesser skill set. When, I just, looking between South Africa and Kenya, well, let's say up to Ethiopia, but that's where humans came from 3.5 million years ago. And then, we dispersed all around the world and we, managed to get ourselves to the moon, right? And to Mars and other things through the development of hard skills. But we're still trying to figure out the most basic things. How do we as humans get along? If I'm different from you, how do I, instead of trying to kill you, learn about you and learn from you so that I can be better and that you can be better? And we're still wrestling with those things, even though we have these incredible achievements. And I think that's the role that we must be playing as we ask these questions in organizations like Bridge Africa, Bridge USA, Bridge Europe, as well as at universities. How can we create a safe place to get along? How can we learn from each other and work better to solve these huge and pressing problems that we face as humanity? And I know that I'm sure you're talking about some of these big questions, and I really appreciate what you've done to try to answer and keep people engaged and keep the dialogue open. So I understand that we have people watching the live stream in Europe, in Africa, in the United States, and I want to encourage people to become involved with some of some questions or some comments. We have a comment section here, and I encourage everyone who's watching to please put a question in there for Martin or Belinder, and we'd love to address those. One other thing that I would like to ask each of you, Belinder, I'll start with you. What is your hope for Bridge Africa, for your community to learn from what we witnessed in the United States? What would you like your community to learn from that experience? You're muted, Belinder. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh.
Common purpose. Common purpose is one of the things that I would want our communities to learn from what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. Because, John, if you engage the Gen Zers, the Generation Z, and you see the way they are getting really, really very involved in African politics and issues that are happening around them, they're becoming very active, very aware, and they're willing to contribute positively towards contributing towards a better environment in Africa. And therefore, we have to, when I speak of common purpose, I mean, like, we have to engage, and we have to start by engaging these younger people, plug into their different perspectives, and see how we can come up with long-term solutions to some of the problems that we face in Africa.
Thank you, Belinder. Martin, I'd like to ask the same question of you. What do you hope that you and your community learned from what happened in the United States?
Well, I guess there are two things. I guess they stand somewhat opposed to each other, and I think I'll start on the I guess the more positive side, and that is that uh, institutions, if they're properly built, work, and if there is a madman in power or there is a particular clique in power, and they try to really deprive people of their rights, destroy the very institutions that uphold those rights, they will fail. If there are proper institutions and mechanisms and controls in place, as the United States does have, and that's the first thing I would like South Africa and certainly the rest of Africa to learn, and that is that we shouldn't have this, and I guess this goes into my second point, which is very much related. We shouldn't have this trust in personalities. We in fact an obsession with personalities, and that's a mistake that many of my fellow classical liberals and libertarians unfortunately made in the United States, and they found in Donald Trump this personality who they really liked, and they ended up putting a lot of their political faith in him, which runs entirely contrary to this idea of a limited government, which is limited specifically for the purposes that Belinder has been talking about, and that is really to enable discourse amongst people, amongst themselves, so that we can engage with each other as equals rather than as factions, one of which has political power and the other of which does not have political power, which always implies a threat of violence. So that's a really important thing, is don't start moving away from political personality. Stop conceiving of these people as our leaders. They quite certainly are not our leaders. We really need to have a mentality of we lead ourselves. We have leaders in our communities. We have natural leaders in our families. We as individuals, to large extent, are our own leaders. But when we reach this point where we decide that specific individuals must become social leaders in general, and this is the I guess the grand mistake that has been made in Africa, and even in a country like Botswana, which is incredibly peaceful and stable and increasingly prosperous, they still have that underlying issue of a specific political party has been deemed to be this leader, the Democratic Party of Botswana, which has been in power since the 1960s, which means that it's underneath the stability. There is an underlying fault that if there's a tiny political earthquake, could bring the whole thing falling down. And this is something that we can learn from Americans, and specifically from your not only your written constitutional system of federalism, but also your culture of decentralization. I mean, it's there was a time in my life when I found it incredibly wasteful and odd that. For instance, in Los Angeles, you literally have cities inside the city of Los Angeles, and you have cities inside the city of Chicago. That's unheard of. For instance, in South Africa, where all of our cities are these large contiguous blocks, and there's very little of that type of decentralization. And your school districts, I believe, to some extent, have government powers. You have towns with a population of 20 or 30, which have their own mayor and their own town councils. That is simply the lesson that I think should be learned in Africa, and that is of decentralization. Make sure that when we don't engage as big political blocks. And in South Africa, it's obviously quite racialized still, but also increasingly developing around political parties, where, as Belinder alluded to earlier, where when someone speaks, it's almost automatically assumed that they speak on behalf of the party that they would most likely be part of, and the problem with that is this underlying call it a possibility of violence that is always there. We're not talking to each other as reasonable beings engaging about ideas. We're instead talking to each other, confronting each other as representatives of factions vying for power over scarce resources. And really, the only way to safeguard against that is to have developed institutions and to have a trust in self and a trust in community rather than a trust in political leaders. And I think the United States is probably one of the because I'm far more concerned with your political culture than your written institutions, and I think the United States really shines there, even more so than countries which might have stronger constitutions, but where there is an absence of this real culture of we are equal as individuals engaging on the plane of public discourse. And to that extent, I think the political polarization might be to an extent quite positive in that there isn't total consensus all the time, which is also very detrimental in its own way, but where there are diverging views, and it really tests the institution. Can people who have these widely radically different views truly live together? And I think the American experiment says yes, it's possible. It's very possible, and that is why I definitely align myself with call them open borders types in the United States and elsewhere. American institutions have proven remarkably resilient to take on other cultures which might not be Western, and to not assimilate the culture into a Western American culture, but assimilate it into a culture of political discourse as equals, and that is really a lesson that not only Africans but also to an extent Europeans and Asians and so on, and other North Americans should learn from the United States. A very successful political experiment, and we should take the 6th of January as an example of showing that even the American system is not perfect, but it was another one of those tests, and it's a test that the United States passed with flying colors, and that is something that we definitely can learn from.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and I appreciate those comments very much. Belinder, I'm going to ask you just to kind of wrap up with one last question, and that is, what can we learn from Kenya, and what can we learn from Africa? I think there's a lot in the United States that we can learn, but I'd like to hear what you think.
Okay, so we have a couple of examples of very stable democracies in Africa. And like Martin said, the problem is we might have some underlying issues or ideologies that these strong democracies are anchored on that is making probably one political party to be in power for a long time. But you have several examples that we can learn from, and that is Mauritius, for example, and also Kenya. In 2002, we had a peaceful transition from dictatorship that we had for 24 years. You know, President Moi ruled Kenya for 24 years. But in 2002, we overwhelmingly voted him out, and we didn't have any problems of, with the transfer of power or election violence at all. So that is something that the US can learn from Kenya in particular. The other thing which I consider to be very historical that the US can learn from Kenya is that we've had 2 presidential petitions that we have had without that went on and got concluded without any bloody incidences. That is one of the examples is the 2017 presidential election petitions, where the judiciary, the Supreme Court in particular, nullified the elections that we had, and we had to go back to the ballot and re-elect the president again. And we didn't have a lot of bloody incidences or a lot of destructions like what we witnessed at the Capitol on January 6th. And then I can also give an example of other countries that I feel have a very strong democracy and a history of peaceful power transitions, like Cape Verde, Namibia, and Ghana. So Ghana, for example, has 2 political parties, main political parties, the National Democratic Congress and the New Patriotic Party. And had a very strong democracy for a long time. They elect the president. They disagree on election results, but they don't storm the Supreme Court or storm Parliament or storm any building at all to protest the election results. What they did, for example, last year they had the presidential elections, and when the results were announced, the people who were not convinced the people who were not content with the results that they had after the election, and they ended up at the Supreme Court to contest the election results. They were not on the streets throwing stones or anything. So people may not know this, but we actually have very good examples of democracies that the US can learn from Africa in order to avoid a situation like what we had at the Capitol on January 6th. And those are just some of the few examples that we have. Now, a common element of some of these examples of democracies that I'm giving you right now is a peaceful transfer of power. Then you have integrity of elections, which is a great factor in political stability. Then also constitutional limits to presidential terms. When a president has served their term, they should be willing to, if they're elected, if a different person is elected, they should be willing to allow the other person to take over leadership from them. Mm-hmm. Then we are also talking freedom of media and freedom of speech. And also in countries like Mauritius, we have platforms for reporting cases of corruption and human rights violations. So those are some of the things that the US can learn from Africa.
That, wonderful, Belinder. And, I really appreciate those comments and sentiments. I think that, we all, if there's one thing there's so many things that we've learned from COVID, but if there's, one thing that we must take away, that is, that we are all interconnected, and we need to understand and support, because it isn't just one place that gets some form of an illness, whether it's a coronavirus or political violence. It's something that impacts us all. And when we can all work together to overcome it, we can all be much stronger. And the best way to do that is the work that you guys are doing with understanding, communicating, sharing, and listening, and respecting one another, so that we can move forward. So I want to thank you once again, Belinder and Martin, for taking the time out of your evening to share your thoughts and your work with us. And please, continue on. You're doing phenomenal work. Keep it up. And I hope we can have more of these conversations moving forward. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.